Hello to everyone. Welcome to Securing Identity in the Age of NHIs and AgenticAI. My name is Karen Crowley. I lead marketing at Andromeda Security, and I will be your host and moderator for today. Just a couple of housekeeping items. All your lines are muted. So if you do have any questions, please pose them in the Q&A, and we will address them at the end. This is going to be a free-flowing conversation today. No slides. We intend to cover a variety of topics, have a healthy debate. I'll give you a brief overview of what we intend to touch upon, understanding the current identity landscape and how it's shifting with cloud and SaaS, and why it matters now, whether it's human or non-human identities, what to look out for. We'll talk a little bit about the challenges with today's traditional security offerings. And then we'll get into a little bit of debate about the future with the oncoming of Agentic AI and how we need to start thinking about it from an identity perspective. So a little bit about our speakers today. Lalit Choda, you may know him as Mr. NHI, is the founder of the NHI management group, where he evangelizes and influences the industry around NHI risks. We're excited to have him here today, as Lalit has unique hands-on experience with over 25 years as a practitioner. He has implemented full end-to-end NHI global remediation programs at major financial institutions. So his insights and conversation are always great. And then we have Ashish Shah. Is our Andromeda's Chief Product Officer and one of our co-founders. Ashish is an expert on identity security in the cloud, permissions management, just-in-time access. His past includes instrumental roles in the growth of Avi Networks and its sale to VMware, as well as other time at Cisco. Lalit, Ashish, anything else to add before we get started?
No, I think I'm excited. Thanks, Lalit, for this opportunity to have a healthy debate, and let's go.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Thanks, Karen, for hosting.
So again, please enter any questions into the Q&A, and we will cover as many as we can at the end. So with that out of the way, let's get rolling. My first question, why should we be talking about identity security? Why are non-human identities such a hot topic right now? Machine identities have been around for a long time. So what's changed in the market to make this so much more urgent? Lalit, maybe you can start us off with your views on this.
Sure, thanks, Karen. Look, clearly, as you said, non-human identities, service accounts, API keys, technical accounts, they've been around since computers, machines existed, but they're always generally kind of an internal issue. It was kind of the forgotten problem child that folks never really wanted to go after because it was hard and difficult. And there's a lot more focus on sort of protecting human controls and protecting your barriers into your organization. So it was always more of an internal kind of sort of issue. I guess over the last sort of 5 to 10 years, kind of with the hyper fragmentation that we're seeing in the environment, cloud, SaaS, microservices, containers, API-based interfaces, and there's a huge increase in third-party SaaS integrations. We're clearly seeing now, a much bigger secret sprawl problem. We've got millions of secrets that are found now, discovered in public repos. There was a recent survey or research done. Last year, 24 million secrets, credentials were found in public repos in GitHub. So I think now the attack surface for non-human identities is now much, much easier, whether it's for an external threat actor or even internal. A lot of the newer kind of credentials, API keys can be used anywhere, even outside your organization if you know the details. So we're actually seeing significantly more breaches, attacks that are using kind of non-human identities as the means to getting in. Yesterday, we just published a 52 NHI breach report to celebrate our 1-year anniversary. And it just shows you how prevalent this issue is now and how exposed organizations are.
Yeah, congratulations on your anniversary.
Thank you.
Ashish, do you want to add on?
I think Lalit hit the nail there, right? I think NHI problem is now exacerbated itself with the 40 to 50 times more NHIs than human identities, especially as you move to cloud and SaaS, where combining the identity growth with the permissions entitlement explosion that you have compared to on-prem, I think the problem is getting worse and the attack surface is getting bigger. I'd like to remind though everyone that two things. One is NHI problem is new, but the human identity problem is not fully solved. So I think we need to put both of these identity security problems in perspective as we move forward to solving them. And two, I think the life cycle and the risks of both human and intertwined. While the NHI problem is upon us right now, we cannot solve it independently of solving the overall identity security problem. So human and non-human together, because as we'll discuss further, not only they're intertwined, but we are solving very similar challenges for both. So I think that perspective is important as we address all identity security.
You touched on this a bit. We know NHIs are growing fast. What exactly makes them so risky? Ashish, do you want to walk us through your thoughts on that?
Absolutely, right. So I think when we think about any identity security, there are aspects that are applicable for both human and non-human identities, right? So let's look at a high-level framework for NHI identity security and then see what is different or same to human identities. I think because a lot of us are familiar with what we do for human, so I think that comparison makes sense. So at the top level, you need to first discover NHIs, right? And I think that's the primary difference between human and non-human. For human identities, you have a centralized directory, whether it's your HR systems or identity providers, IDPs. Non-human identities, by definition, are distributed. They are in your cloud, they are in your applications, they are in your other systems, they're on premises. And so discovery is a key aspect that's unique to NHI. Beyond that, you go to credentials management or key management for NHI. Not too dissimilar from passwords management or authentication aspects of human identity security. But given the sensitivity of NHIs and the ease of attacks, credentials or key management is an important aspect of NHI. Then comes entitlement management or permissions management. So if you think about the two aspects of security in general, authentication and authorizations, authentication defines who you are and whether you'll get compromised or not, how easily you get compromised, human or non-human. Entitlements define your attack surface. If you are compromised, how bad can the damage be? That's decided by the entitlements. So I think entitlement management is a key component of any identity security, NHI or human. And many times that aspect is forgotten in all discussions I have seen, at least lately, around NHI security. Everybody focuses on discovery and key management and lifecycle management, but forgets the entitlement management piece. So I think that's an important thing that we need to remember that's you need to do for human or non-human. And the final piece of NHI security is client or application security. Think of human, you or me. If we were get socially engineered, then even if a password is not compromised, you have an attack. Same thing on the NHI side. There is no social engineering, but the client of the applications that's using the NHI, if that is compromised, let's say a VM or a third party that's using the NHI, if they're compromised, you still have an attack. So discovery, key rotations or key credential management, entitlement management, and client and application security are key components of NHI security. And other than discovery, they're the same as human identity security. And that's why I think tying them together in terms of managing them both is equally important. Lalit, what are your thoughts on that topic?
Yeah, look, I think you've summarized some of the points very well. Like, just to add, look, the biggest issue with NHIs is they're static in nature, or the majority of them are static in nature, right? So outside of discovery, you then need to find out who are the owners, right? Typically, these don't have any ownership assigned. They've been created whenever, some maybe 30 years ago, 20 years ago. So due to lack of ownership, You also find they have they're stale. We found organizations where many NHIs, 50-60%, have never been used for more than a year, and need to be cleaned up, removed, hygiene done. Otherwise, you've got a much larger surface of area of attack. And then there's other things that we see around sharing of credentials, lack of environment segregation. To your point about excessive privileges, I can give you a great story 25 years ago when SOX controls came in, and it was my first time dealing with non-human identities, or we used to call them technical accounts or database technical accounts at the time. We had to cycle our passwords every 180 days, which we struggled to do. There were no vault solutions, but the focus on SOX was right privileges, right? So we analyzed all of our NHIs on all of our Sybase databases, and we found they were overprivileged, that 90% of them had write privileges when they only needed read. So we re-baselined their privileges to read and reduced the surface area of risk in terms of how many write accounts we had, and then also reduced the requirement to cycle. I think the final thing is hard-coded credentials. That's a massive issue. I guess we touched on it earlier, but a lot of these credentials, static in nature, API keys, passwords, are usually found hard-coded in source code and many other places, Slack channels, Confluence. So one of the biggest challenges you've got is how do you start securing the credentials? You're required to then put those into a vault or move to more passwordless based authentication mechanisms. That can be a massive, massive uphill battle as you then maybe think more strategically about more of a zero trust dynamic kind of target state.
I think that's a great transition into our next topic. And you mentioned before, you just published a report on 52 breaches, right? That obviously speaks to the volume of the problem. So we've kind of discussed why NHIs matter, what's at stake. When you look at today's identity landscape, and you started to touch on this a little bit, are today's IGA and PAM solutions equipped to solve these challenges? Lalit, do you want to take this one first?
Yeah, look, it's a good question. We get asked it a lot from clients, CISOs. Why can't I use my existing IGA PAM stack? I think to many of the points that we just touched on, typically the IGA PAM stack has been more designed towards kind of human identity. Whilst the PAM solutions can handle non-human identities, have typically been focused on more sort of highly privileged PAM accounts that you then use for humans to sort of get access to elevate privileges, or the admin accounts. They've never really been designed to meet some of those key challenges around hard-coded credentials, the ownership, the cycling kind of challenges, the fact that you've got stale accounts, and the level of privileges that an account may have, or the breadth of access. So I think kind of current IGA PAM solutions need to mature, and look, they are moving fast, and then starting to look at sort of some of the NHI capabilities, but generally they've never been designed to meet kind of the specific life cycle processes around dealing with static NHI credentials. Ashish, if you wanted to add anything from your perspective.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'd like to step back a little, and I think tie back to the earlier conversation we had around static credentials or dormant or inactive accounts and so on, right? So if you look at the broader identity security challenge today that we have, especially as the enterprises have moved to cloud and SaaS, the nature of privilege access has also changed. What do I mean by that? On premises, you had shared accounts, admin accounts for root access or SSH access to databases and so on. Cloud doesn't work that way. SaaS applications don't work that way. There is no one admin account in AWS, right? You have admin level roles or privileges, and you're not logging with a shared account with a rotated password. I'm logging as Ashish, and I get temporary elevated access to an admin level role. So it's a very different way of doing privilege access management. Some people call it cloud PAM, but it's more elevated access. And that's why the on-premises tools were not designed for such a thing, not just from a functionality point of view, but also a user experience point of view. Your cloud developer or user doesn't have the patience of waiting a few hours for somebody to approve your request. They want it now in an automated fashion without compromising their security, right? So that's a different experience and different functionality you need. So that's the first reason why the on-premises solutions are not appropriate for cloud. The second thing that is important is what you touched upon, Lalit, is identifying activities, right? On-premises tools, the traditional IGA-PAM tools were designed for compliance and they were a system of record of who has access to what, not who's using what, right? It's extremely important to understand activities to right-size the privileges or take away dormant accounts. And so you also need tools that are tracking activity in near real time to be able to remove those unused privileges or unused identities. So I think at that high level, the requirements have changed for us as we move to a more modern environment, cloud, SaaS, more of the NHIs. And so I think you need tools that are more designed for the modern environment. They're tracking activities, building context, deriving that intelligent automations that today's cloud and SaaS user requires. And then we can go into the specific functionality around what the problem we're trying to solve. So I think
Yeah, I think
that's all taken. Yeah, go ahead.
sorry, some great points. I think also to add, I think another angle that's very unique, especially for NHIs, is back discovery. You can definitely get an inventory of your identities, but you need to scan for them as well, right? So finding hard-coded credentials in your source code. So that's another unique thing, right? That existing kind of solutions didn't support. Look, I think the other thing that you need to think about is when you look at how you have to manage the full life cycle of non-human identities, this touches on everything to do with all of our IT processes and controls and different teams, right? So it's not just an IAM function, right? Or a PAM team maybe sitting inside IAM. This also touches on DevSecOps as well, right? Because it's the developers, right, that are trying to develop their code, deploy quickly, deal with secrets. And if you've not got good integrated solutions in terms of DevSecOps, CI/CD integration into your Vault solutions, then clearly you'll continue to create more and more secret sprawl. So, part of the goal also is to make sort of the developer experience kind of more productive without exposing secrets. So, it's definitely a much broader space as you start dealing with NHIs and the more modern cloud-based infrastructures.
Yeah, totally. In fact, there's a question right now that we'll just address it now. Do they have tools that to detect hard-coded credentials and Git, Confluence, and what is the level of false positiveness and so on? Yeah, there are tools out there. I think some of them are early, some of them are still maturing. But yes, I think that is an important aspect of any NHI tool, any credentials management tool that is able to discover those static credentials. And nature of static has multiple connotations in my view. Static means not being rotated for appropriate time and can also have, if not been used by anybody, so maybe just delete it. So one is rotating it, the other is just deleting that's unused. But I want to go back to a couple of things that Lalit, you said, right, about user experience. I think that's extremely important. In fact, as we talk to customers, right, not just about non-human identities, but to human identities, we want to go towards zero trust. What does zero trust mean, right? Is it zero standing privilege? Well, that's impractical. And we like to think is standing privilege should be low risk, but that's frequently used. Everything else goes to just in time. So JIT is great. Why has it not been used enough? Well, frankly, because the user experience of existing JIT solutions does not work. So the developers say, I'd rather go with my standing access because I get it now rather than wait for a few hours for somebody approve it. So I think the point you made about the modern tools need to meet the DevSecOps and the users where they are in the day-to-day is extremely important. The last thing I want to touch upon your earlier point is around where this function belongs. You're right, the traditional IG and PAM tools were part of IAM team. Now, the more modern solutions, modern enterprises are moving the identity function to the CISO team, the security team, right? Because identities become a security functions and not just an IT function. And I think there's a great collaboration that's happening between the cloud security and overall InfoSec team, the IAM team, and the GRC team, because while there are multiple personas and multiple use cases, I think it's all intertwined. So I think as we think about more evolution of identity security, we need to think from security, IT, and risk management perspective.
Yeah, look, great. Look, I just back to the original question as well. Look, I ran a huge NHI program, a large financial institution. When we ran our first scan of our source code, GitHub, and Bitbucket, we found over 1 million potential credential leaks. But that's an organization that had probably 5,000 plus applications. To the point about false positives, yes, you're going to get lots of false positives. And look, there are some great solutions out there that can do very mature scanning, but the false positive problem doesn't go away. And that creates other challenges. Well, if someone's trying to attest that what the scanner's found is not real, could you be bypassing controls and hiding real credentials? So it's quite a complex space, also from a regulatory standpoint, especially with financial institutions. We're seeing a lot of regulators explicitly asking questions. Do you have hard-coded passwords, credentials in your source code? Many of the regulators are doing red teaming exercises, and the first thing they discover is hard-coded credentials in your public repos. So, you're guaranteed in your organization you're going to have thousands of these, and this is something you definitely want to get in front of before an audit or someone catches you out and discovers them both externally and internally. And look, just on that, I would add one more point. Look, a lot of people worry about NHI risks being an external threat. Yes, we are seeing lots of breaches, but a lot of humans internally within your organization also use NHIs. We actually saw as our PAM controls kicked in and we stopped people getting into production and giving them temporary access, they didn't enjoy the experience, obviously, right? Everybody complains with anything new. So we saw an exponential increase in people using NHI accounts as humans. So this is a major issue. If you're using NHIs, you've got no monitoring. There can be compliance issues, SOX issues. So this is as much an insider threat issue, and even accidents can occur with humans using NHIs. And that's another story I can tell for another time.
Yeah, no, I think you bring up a couple of very interesting points. I have a follow-up point on that. If the static credentials is a big issue, we should all be moving towards ephemeral credentials, right? Like, for example, especially in a cloud workloads, whether it's AWS, Azure, GCP, all of those offer ephemeral credentials option. Like if you're using an EC2 VM, by definition, a workload identity doesn't have a key that you have to manage as an enterprise. It's managed by the cloud provider. So our recommendation in general has been to, whenever possible, use ephemeral credentials with whatever system you're using, whether it's a cloud or an application. Many of them have the ability to do those workload identities with ephemeral credentials. So at least you don't have to worry about stagnant keys or compromisable keys. You just have to focus on the entitlement side of things and so on. Any thoughts on that, Lalit?
No, I think, look, clearly I would agree that as an organization, you do need to move to sort of ephemeral dynamic credentials as much as possible, because all the issues we've just talked about are all related to static credentials. A lot of those issues go away, as you move to more dynamic zero trust model. And then clearly, as you do that, your attack surface reduces significantly as well.
Yeah.
So one other thing on this topic that kind of came to mind for me when we're talking about other solutions as well, right? And not addressing the bigger part of this problem. I think there's a lot of solutions that can just give visibility, right? And tell you everything that's wrong. And we've heard over and over, right? Like I don't want to hear everything that's wrong. I need to actually take action. So I think that's one of the, the things to think about, right, when evaluating and looking at solutions is what can help you actually take action versus what's just going to show you all of your things that are wrong. So Ashish, I don't know if you want to comment
Yeah.
on.
Definitely. No, I think a lot of our customers in general, the CISOs we speak to say, don't tell me to boil the ocean. Don't tell me 100 things are broken. Give me a stack rank list with recommended actions, ideally from the solution itself. And I think that's absolutely true. So I think quantifying the risk and stack ranking the priorities of what are the top level issues we want to fix, that reduces your attack surface uh, with very little effort. So highest ROI and in terms of effort versus the business impact, I think is extremely important. And then having ability to right size let's say entitlements or delete unused keys or whatever the remediation be, doing it right from the solution is extremely important. I think that frankly defines the efficacy of a solution, and it'll increase the adoption of the tool in the enterprise. Lalit, what you've seen in the practice?
Yeah, look, I'm a big practitioner and believer in taking a risk-based approach. You can't eat the elephant in the room for something as big as, say, an NHI problem. The last program I ran was nearly a 4-year program, and we still didn't quite finish the job. So you have to really take a risk-based approach, go for your highest risk accounts, highest risk apps, and your most exposed credentials. So look, again, many organizations have very limited budgets. Unless you get hit with a huge regulatory obligation where you then have to spend as much as you just need to meet the regulatory requirements. Most have strained budgets. So to your point, you can't fix everything. You're just never going to have the budget to do it. So you have to take that balanced approach with how can you just reduce that attack surface, clean up, hygiene, start improving things going forward, and stop the bleeding. So that would be our kind of recommendation is take a more kind of pragmatic approach around this, because you're never going to fix this in a year unless you've got a very simple, environment with not a lot of tech debt.
Right. So this has been a great conversation so far. So I think, one of the things we said in the beginning is we're going to talk a little bit about the future. I think the elephant in the room is agentic AI. Everyone's talking about it right now. So is it hype? Is it reality? How concerned should organizations be? And then thinking about how will identity and security need to evolve in the face of agentic AI? Ashish, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's definitely a big discussion in the industry today. I think it's a lot of hype, but that is, of course, reality. I think it's a future to come. So I think the biggest questions that I get asked is agentic AI just another NHI, or is it something bigger? So my view is the following. Look, if you look at the traditional NHI, traditional meaning the service accounts and non-human identities that we've been discussing so far, they have keys and they talk to one applications usually. They're very predictable. You can predict what they're doing as long as you monitor their activity and see what they're doing periodically. Compare that to a human identity like you and me. We interact with multiple applications, multiple environments. We are more ad hoc and so less predictable. Now, if you look at agentic AI, I think it's a combination of both. Technically, agentic AI is an NHI, right? Because it's not a human. It's using, some cases it's acting on behalf of, something it's autonomous, but it's using credentials to talk to applications, but it's not talking to one application, it's talking to multiple applications. And secondly, like human, it's more ad hoc, it's more autonomous. So if you just classify it as an NHI, I think you're doing disservice because you are not going to be able to solve the challenges that the agentic AI poses effectively. We like to think of agentic AI as a third type of identity, which is a combination of human and non-human, because it requires effective guardrails to make sure that agentic AI behaves the way you want it to behave. And so from that point of view, if you can model it like a human behavior where it can do multiple things, and then define guardrails. That's a better way to securing agentic AI. I'm sure Lalit has some views on that as well. Lalit?
Yeah, I probably haven't thought about it as much depth as you have, Ashish, but yeah, look, in my simple view, it's an NHI. Yes, clearly, some of the big concerns folks are worried about is like kind of we're already seeing a huge secret spore problem. 1 to 50 NHIs to humans. There's a concern now with kind of agentic AI. We'll see those numbers, increase further still, and people are predicting that humans and sort of people writing software will disappear, and it will be done through agentic AI. So we're just going to have millions of these agentic AIs all over the world running. So clearly, the big concern is one, given all the issues we've talked about around NHIs and sort of all the weak controls, that if you build your AI agents on top of those weak controls with static credentials, right, it's a recipe for disaster. We've already seen a few infamous breaches, including DeepSeek, right, where kind of those products have been compromised and secrets have been scattered all over the place in those products. I think the other concern is around, are these agentic AI, processes going to have excessive privileges? Because the view is that I guess they potentially need to be able to do a much broader set of things that are more ad hoc in nature, and whether that means gaining more privileges, be that just in time. That's the other concern, right? That could you end up over privileging kind of the agentic AI NHIs, and then therefore causing either bigger attack surface risks from an external and internal threat standpoint. But I fully agree. Kind of, we need to put in the appropriate guardrails. Look, I think to the point about is there hype? Look, I think there's a lot to be concerned about. In speaking to a number of folks, even at RSA, I think most organizations at the moment are kind of building very simple agentic AI processes to maybe replace sort of simple sort of human functions that are being performed. They're not yet at the stage where they kind of can do anything and everything and can kind of just be that kind of nirvana state where just ask it to do anything and it will do anything and everything within your organization and even take over you as the CEO. So I think we're a long way away from that. So I think there is hype, but I think it's important that in particular with agentic AI, we do kind of use all the best practices around zero trust, dynamic secrets, so we can at least reduce the surface area of risk over this huge growth area.
Yeah, and I think the one point that comes to me is, given the scale that you mentioned, human to non-human and then to agentic AI, you cannot do this by hand. You have to automate everything around identity security for agentic AI, which means you have to do behavioral analysis. I think that's a key component for us to build effective guardrails for agentic AI, for any identity for that matter. Behavioral analysis is extremely important because that can then build context to drive the right set of guardrails automatically. So I think that's where we're focused on. I think we should all be focused on, which is how to do this automatically and intelligently.
And then do we get to, if our agentic AIs are doing our work for us, do we all get to be paid the same and just go sit on the beach? Is that how it's going to work?
Yet to be seen. In my view, I think there is always more interesting work. So I don't think I want to retire anytime soon. But yeah, I think it's just more interesting work, better work.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so amazing discussion so far. I think before we wrap up, we have a few questions to answer. I know there's a couple. Ashish, I know you saw them. Do you want to answer the first couple and then I'll...
Sure. The first question is around what is the playbook when an external vendor does not support OIDC and request static credentials? There was back to a discussion around ideally we should use ephemeral credentials, but what if you have to use static credentials? I think two things. One is right size the privileges. Make sure that the NHIs that you've given externally, that external NHI using the static credentials has limited set of permissions. And second, do behavioral analysis on that. So for example, an ideal way, you start that external NHI in a sandbox, monitor it for a while to see what permissions using, right size them. And then once you go to production environment, make sure that that doesn't deviate. So back to my earlier point around least privilege and also behavioral analysis. That's what I recommend, how you maintain the security of these static credentials coming from outside. And then the second question, Lalit, any question?
Yeah, look, I think obviously to add to that, I think while some people have different views on rotation, I think, making sure with your external provider that you're regularly retaining those API keys, for example, is very important, because we've seen so many breaches where keys have been stolen and then been used, many months later. You also need to have, the same when you think of like back to the original discussion around human and non-human life cycle processes, right? When someone leaves the firm, right, or transfers, right, you remove their access. The same needs to apply for NHIs, API keys, like someone leaving your team, someone leaving the firm. That's a risk factor, right? That they can still use that key, even though they're outside your organization. So regular rotating, obviously making sure these static credentials are in a vault, and you limit access to who knows them. Really humans shouldn't have visibility to these static credentials. These are just all best practices until you can work with your vendors, third parties, to move to more a zero trust based model, which is not an easy path to get to.
I agree. Yeah, and I think the common thread is activity monitoring and behavioral analysis, right? Like you rotate the keys, but if the key's not been used for the last 90 days or 180 days, whatever your threshold is, just delete it, right? Don't keep it. Don't even rotate it. Just delete it, right? And the second point you made around human ownership, I think that goes to the second question that somebody asked, which is for legacy NHIs with no clear ownership or usage, deletion can be risky. How do you recommend approaching cleanup without breaking critical systems? Great question, right? I think so. So I'll answer it in a couple of parts, and I'm sure Lalit has a view on that. Ownership is important, and ownership can be derived in multiple ways. Yes, in a new system, when the key is created or NHI is created, you assign an owner. But in a legacy system, ideally, you want to at least look at some usage analysis. So whoever last used it should be to assign an owner, either indirectly or indirectly. If there is no usage logs, well, you need to look at some level of activity logs on the client side or on the destination side. But combination of creations and usage is how you assign owners. And then finally, I think the days are not far where you have to do access reviews for governance for NHIs. We do access reviews for humans, right? For SOX or PCI or the compliance. I think we will have to do the same thing for NHIs to make sure that these NHIs are still being used. So I think there is no one silver bullet there. I think depending on the situation, you'll have to do a combination of different things. Thoughts on that, Lalit?
Yeah, I've got many thoughts. I could talk for hours on this topic. I've got lots of practitioner first-hand experience. At a previous organization, I used to run some of the recertification processes, and we actually looked at human and non-human as a combined from a recertification standpoint. But clearly, there was a lot more concern about, how there's just the challenges and the kind of fatigue of people doing recertifications, right? People just say accept, or just, and a lot of people don't, do the reviews and then they get marked for auto removal, right? So we've seen many occasions where people have just been lazy, not done their job. And unfortunately, when it's come to an NHI, we've had automated removal processes and we've caused numerous production issues. So yes, the operational impact in removing NHIs is very painful. Even doing things like cycling, do you know all the places in the code where your NHI is being used? We probably don't have time, but we had an example where we saw one NHI was not only shared between prod and non-prod and hard-coded and not cycled, it was shared with about 8 other applications. So when we had some incident and we needed to cycle the password, rather than taking a day to cycle the password, it took us 3 weeks because we had to understand all the dependencies. You know, some people say we think we gave the password to some teams, some we don't know. And then to your point, Ashish, we had to turn on monitoring controls on our databases to see, you know, who was using that NHI, which IP addresses. So yes, usage information is critical if you want to drive a hygiene program to clean up legacy accounts. So I would say this is probably one of your top things that you should do as you start taking a risk-based approach is clean up your legacy debt first and massively reduce your surface area risk.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah.
Great. I think our last question kind of wraps into our wrap up. So I think in the interest of time, Ashish, I'll let you address that one in our wrap up because it's a little asking more about how Andromeda handles something. So it's been a great discussion. Before we wrap up, I'd love to give you each 30 seconds, a minute for any final thoughts or takeaways. Lalit, do you want to go first?
Yeah, look, thanks for giving us the opportunity to talk here. Look, our goal at the Non-Human Identity Management Group is really focused on educating, evangelizing organizations, and bringing the industry together to solve what I would say is probably the hardest risk that you'll face in your career dealing with NHIs. My guidance to everyone on the call, anyone listening, this is a real risk that you can't ignore. Look, I'm not trying to scare people, but you're sitting on a huge exposure, huge technical debt, and this is something you really need to get in front of, start thinking about problem, take a holistic approach, and visit our portal, nhimg.org, where we provide the best independent knowledge center on NHIs.
Great.
Thanks, Lalit. You're doing a great service to the community with the NHI Management Group. So yeah, I'll wrap up. I think there are a couple more questions, but I'll try to interweave them both in. But I think the future of human, non-human, and agentic AI is around building context. So how is Andromeda approaching it and how we should approach as a community is understanding, getting different data sources ingested into a centralized data lake. That's what Andromeda does. And then once you have all the data, configuration data, behavioral data, privilege data, the blast risk data, then you can run the modern AI ML models to build context. That context will give you that intelligent automation that you need to get to the scale of human, non-human, and agentic AI as we go to the future, right? So whether it's around enforcing policies or right-sizing privileges, or in some cases doing the access governance, I think context-based automation is the key as we move to the future. And yes, it'll impact, it'll not necessarily address easily the legacy environments where you still have lack of usage and so on, but we'll have to deal this on a case-by-case basis. But ideally, as we move forward with more modern systems or cloud environments, build context, drive automation, that's the only way you can scale. So look forward to engaging with many of you offline, but thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. So Ashish and Lalit, thank you again. It was an insightful conversation. We will be sharing some follow-up resources, including the breach report that Lalit mentioned, and some tools you can explore in your own time. Until then, please take care and please reach out to us with any further questions. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.